All right, let's get this started. I don't think we really have to do too many introductions. Just to kind of kick people off, my name's Dan McGraw. I'm from Carbon Pulse. I am here, and this is a side event to the North American Carbon World Conference. We're going to be talking about RGGI, kind of shifting into this post-2020 world, and maybe going into this next program review. I am joined by a lovely group of people. I guess I'm going to start at the bottom and go counterclockwise, but Justin Johnson, who is a partner at MMR. He is also a former RGGI commissioner from Vermont, and I believe you're also the AIDA RGGI point person. On your bottom right is Mandy Warner. She is from EDF. She is our guru of RGGI and environmental stuff. And then to my right is Andrew McKeon from RGGI Inc., who is the person that is administrating this whole business. So he has the answers to all of our questions. And he'll be forthcoming about all the future caps and the future price increases and when Pennsylvania will be joining the program. I actually, kind of before we get into the program review, actually I should also mention, I haven't used the system a ton, but if anybody has any questions, if you go to the Q&A section, you can ask questions there. They'll pop out. I'm going to kind of leave 15 minutes towards the end and allow people to ask their own questions. But between now and then, I'm just going to pummel these people with questions. So Justin, I know you're not you don't look at the secondary market probably as much as I do, but RGGI prices went to $9 earlier this year, which was an all-time high. They've kind of retraced back to the $8 recently. Some of those gains roughly aligned with rises during the program review. Does kind of those price implications, do those come up when you're leading into some of these reviews? Do they make sense? Do they influence the conversations? Do they change any of the discussions at all?
Well, I think they do. I mean, in as much as RGGI is a market that sort of tries to operate somewhat like a real market. I mean, obviously, any conversation around program review is going to cause people to think, well, gee, what happens next? Is the cap going to go down? How much is it going to go down? Are the states going to be able to agree? And all? So I think, one of the things to keep in mind is the states are very cognizant, and this is something they learned and gotten better at over time. Originally it was a group of government folks who weren't really that involved in markets, so they didn't think about it that much, but they've gotten very good at recognizing that sort of trying to lay out their program and where they're going and when decisions might be made is really important to stop too much sort of volatility in those prices. But ultimately, I don't think you can avoid it if you're going to have program reviews. They announced and have announced at various times that there will be program reviews. There will continue to be program reviews in the future, about every 3 years or so. The part of that was to say, if we announce we're doing a program review, it's not some huge thing out of the blue that would necessarily have an impact on the price. But I think it's natural to assume that the price is that the cap is likely to go down as part of a program review, because even after 2, we're still fairly long, and that people will speculate on that in some way, and it tends to drive the price up. So I think we can expect to see that again, with the caveat, of course, that with pandemic and all that sort of thing, that there's a bunch of other movements within the market that make it more difficult to sort of manage that.
I know I didn't ask you those questions, and Andrew or Mandy, I don't know if you guys have any comments on that question specifically. Feel free to jump in if you do. I'm going to say no.
Yeah.
Mandy?
No, I mean,
nothing to add.
No, I was going to say I think Justin hit it right there. we don't, I mean, the states aren't thinking about price. At least they're not talking to me. The agency heads aren't talking to me about the price. Where's the price going? What does this mean? You know, the whole objective of this program of these state programs is to reduce emissions by a prescribed amount, and then the price is determined out of that. So, but I would say that Justin was right on about this idea of being aware of markets and being careful about announcements and how they impact markets, and how to make sure that you give markets enough time to digest things so that volatility is, you know, attenuated. So I just add those.
This is actually a good segue because Andrew, I just wanted you to kind of give a kind of rough idea of, you know, the timeline and kind of like the you know, a rough outline of this next program review. I know that you guys have already announced that it will, you know, begin this summer, but, you know, kind of looking a little bit further out, you know, when do you think, you know, you might kind of progress a little bit further, and, you know, rough and that kind of stuff?
Sure. So just for our listeners, so they know that back in February, the agency heads, the RGGI agency heads, put out a statement talking about the plan for program review this year. Just stepping back to the last program review, an announcement was made then and included that basically said that the states were committed to initiating a subsequent program review by 2021. So that was, of course, you know, Dan, I know you were asking me right at the end of 2020 when that was going to begin. And we stuck by 2021. It was like, if we do it on December 30th of 2021, we've initiated program review. So there's a bunch of things that have been going on over the years. The participation of new states, the you know, discussions with Pennsylvania, very important. And I think that you know, the plan now is to publish a preliminary program review schedule in late summer, and include in that public engagement to solicit input in the process, with that public engagement including listening sessions in the fall and into the winter. And then with that input, then developing program review objectives, you know, for deliberation, and doing technical analysis with continued outreach to especially environmentally overburdened communities, in sort of going into the spring of 2022. And then as far as when all of that will be wrapped up, you know, the 2016 program review started in 2015 and it ended in 2017. So I'm not sure why it's still called the 2016 program review, but I think the thinking is that, you know, 2022 is sort of the target year to put it all together.
Gotcha. This is probably me editorializing a little bit, and feel free to say something, Andrew, here, but I will say that the fact that the 2016 review got pushed back a year, and you guys kind of added another 4 years to the next review, the fact that you're away from that presidential cycle, I don't know if that helps at all, but it, you know, it seems like you allow the federal policy to kind of work its way through and can kind of cycle its way down to the state level.
I think it's helpful that we don't have to worry about a presidential election in the next year or two, for sure.
So, Mandy, I'm going to lump you in here. So we're going into this review. We actually have a lot of really interesting moving pieces when you think about the program. You've got Pennsylvania sitting on the sidelines. You've got Virginia that joined this year. You've got New Jersey that joined the previous year. So you've kind of more or less have added 3 states. Coming into this program review, what do you think are some of the core issues that will be discussed?
Well, 2 of the core issues that, you know, EDF is really hoping to see undertaken in the program review, first and foremost, is ambition, right? We now have a 50 to 52% national emissions reduction target for 2030. In our view, to have a chance of meeting this target, we need the power sector to achieve at least an 80% reduction by 2030. The current RGGI budget falls a bit short of this, so we're thinking about the policy in the program review. We feel we should be reorienting ourselves to discuss what we actually want to achieve in the long term in this cap, and what's the scale of reductions necessary to get us to our long-term goals. And as a leading carbon market, you know, EDF certainly hopes that RGGI is aligning to at least this 80% trajectory. The second, really core issue that EDF is looking at in the program review is emissions leakage. We think covering imported power under the caps is one way to help improve environmental performance of the program, while also protecting RGGI states who might be concerned about generation leakage that's occurring. I work in Pennsylvania. That is a really day-to-day topic of concern. And as folks may be aware, PJM has convened a task force to look at carbon pricing and should really continue to engage the RGGI states and stakeholders to think through emissions leakage mitigation solutions. From our perspective, the best approach though is for PJM to provide the states with the info that they need to be able to cover imported emissions under their own program. And critically, we saw earlier this year, PJM's indicated they're going to move forward with a really important step here. They're going to share some of that information that will be needed by states, the marginal carbon emissions rates. So that can help inform RGGI states as they're thinking about addressing emissions leakage outside of the RGGI region. This is just one piece of the puzzle, though. We think there's more data that needs to be provided by PJM, specifically, how power is flowing across the region, whether it's coming from one RGGI state to another or outside of the RGGI region. And we really, hope that RGGI states continue to ask PJM for that data to kind of facilitate some of the mechanisms that they could start incorporating into their own programs, including covering imported power under the cap. So those are just two of the big overarching issues that we're thinking about going into the next program review that would be really helpful to tackle.
It's perfect. I'm going to come back to one of those comments. I also want to give Justin a chance to jump in on that question, since you've kind of been behind the black curtain while we're making these decisions.
So I think that the ambition piece is a really important one, and I think the more ambitious you are on the cap, the more the leakage question comes up. But I think overall in the program review, I think that the challenge going into this program review is, as the program has matured and now we have 2.5 new states, you have the sort of the club has gotten a bit broader, and the needs across those states are not quite as in sync as they perhaps once were, and there's more of them. So getting to a sort of consensus agreement across, from states that have been there for 52 auctions to one that hasn't been in an auction yet, that's going to be a challenge for the, early on it was a small, pretty tight-knit club, group of people, and they had very similar goals and views. And I think that the model is still strong, but it's gonna take some effort to bring all of those disparate sort of views to the table. And then underlying that, I think, is the perennial challenge in program review, and that is allocation across the region. Given shifts in fuel and that type of thing, I think that how the states negotiate that out, which is a completely sort of behind the screen thing, but that'll be important to getting ultimate agreement in the program review.
Andrew, I don't know if you want to say anything. I do have a very specific question if you don't.
No, I think again, Justin is correct in the fact that it's a much broader grouping of states. I do have to say that miracles are possible, and I think 2017 was a miracle. After the unexpected results of the election in 2016, things being turned upside down, sort of wandering in the desert, and then yet all of these states came together, in 2017 at the end to put together, what I think the market felt was a very robust, cap trajectory. So we don't know. We'll see. But and especially with a state coming in that could be, so large compared to the program as it is, that's going to have a big impact.
So I'm going to come back to Mandy's question, but I do want to, or Mandy's comment, which is really, really interesting, I think. But you made the comment about 2016, 2017 being this, this miracle, getting it done. Came during that period. The fact that this is everybody's kind of second go around, does that help the process at all? Does it allow for some efficiencies? I mean, Andrew, feel free to say something. Justin, obviously, Mandy, anybody. I just think that the fact that this isn't everybody's first time going through this process, is only going to make it a little bit easier this time around.
Well, it's the third program review. So I guess you considering the last one sort of like the first real program review, or
No.
saying,
I mean,
because
the,
I was
the people that there was enough new people that came into the Reggie commissioner spots, and you had a decent amount of people that left, in between that 2012, 2016 period. You came on board as well. So, I mean, there's people that, you're getting accustomed to this system. It's a little bit different, right? And, having 1, 2, 3 reviews under your belt makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. And I do think that, states have been thinking, they're always thinking about, what's coming next. And I think, just discussions informally amongst agency heads about what the next program review may look like have been interesting. I'm not going to actually share some of the details there, but they're definitely thinking about how this program review might be different. How could it be different from ones in the past, and how, addressing Justin's point, taking states with maybe different sort of goals in mind, how to sort of keep them all under the same umbrella, I think is going to be a challenge there. But
I think the biggest thing they have going for them going into this, and seeing as I was involved in the 2012 program review, it's very much the third one in my mind. But keep in mind that going into 2012, all we had was the modeling work that had been done in like 2004 and 5. It was we were clearly way long. We'd had the global financial crisis and this massive fuel switching with the fracking boom and all that sort of things. So I think what they have really underpinning the program at this point is, more than a decade of experience in how it works, in the modeling work that's been done, and a better sense of, well, if we do this, this might happen, or if we do this, this might happen, or if we do more of this or less of this. So I think, at least from that perspective, they can sort of move on to the negotiation piece and spend a little less time on the background piece. I think there's a pretty solid understanding of what they have in terms of a bank and how that plays out, and just some of the sort of fundamentals of the program are in place. So now they can sort of skip those and get to the hard part.
I'm going to jump off of Mandy's question. Andrew, has there been any discussion about bringing imported power into the program? Or is that, an issue that you guys have looked at?
It is not an issue that has really been brought to the fore in discussions that I've had, with agency heads. But it is, program review is the appropriate sort of venue for that type of a discussion. We have our electricity monitoring reports that we do annually, and we haven't been seeing through that there's a problem with imported electricity being more carbon intense, or than the electricity that we're using, generating within. So we're not, although that's not exactly a leakage report, it's sort of indicating whether leakage, is looking like a problem for RGGI, and it hasn't historically been. But when you're bringing in new states, Virginia, potentially Pennsylvania, there are changes that might indicate that this could become a bigger problem, and it's something that the states are aware of and will keep looking at. Having said all that, the idea that the way the program runs is it's the generation within the RGGI region that is has the price on carbon put on it. What about the generation outside the RGGI region that's brought in? Should that have a price on carbon? No discussions on that at this point that I'm aware of.
Gotcha. So I want to bring it back to another issue that I think is kind of like tied up into this whole next program review, and you've seen a little bit of hints into it with the Pennsylvania draft rule, and we're going to talk about Pennsylvania here in a second. But environmental justice concerns have popped up in the Transportation Climate Initiative, which is more or less overlaps pretty well with the RGGI program. You've seen some of these comments pop up in the California Cap and Trade program. So Mandy, can you kind of talk a little bit about, how does a program like RGGI address those equity concerns and then also spread the benefits, across the communities?
Yeah, for sure. So in general, like RGGI should really take the TCI process and learn from it, right? TCI is thinking about integrating EJ and equity into their program design. They have explicitly committed to things like minimum equity investment, establishing EJ advisory boards, and annually reporting equity impacts. So they're still in the process of finalizing these pieces in the model rule, and there's a lot of steps for the states to take, but we really think RGGI could go ahead and just start incorporating some of those elements and lessons from the TCI development process. Additionally, I mean, environmental justice groups absolutely should be engaged and involved during the program review and beyond. I think, folks are aware we've seen some pretty positive steps from states like New Jersey who are thinking about the investment side of RGGI as an opportunity for advancing EJ priorities. You're seeing states like Virginia coming into the program and they're codifying EJ as part of their rule. EJ is also really central to the discussions in Pennsylvania. The state is taking the opportunity to convene really critical, overdue conversations, frankly, about how do we help environmental justice communities? How do we leverage the investments that can come from this program to, invest in projects that reduce pollution, expand air monitoring programs, and more. So it seems to me like in the upcoming program review, there's going to be a lot more examples of policies and approaches to draw from than there may have been historically. So as we're thinking about that real obligation to ensure that RGGI benefits all communities, there's and be leveraged to achieve the needed outcomes in EJ communities, that there's a lot that we can draw from the last couple of years. And again, some of the steps that I mentioned, they're just steps. We know that we think they're important steps. We know they're not like the end all outcome that we need to really achieve justice with the program. So we know we must do more, but I'm encouraged by some of the things that we've been seeing.
I would add that I think it's just a part of RGGI becoming a more mature program, that they continue to look at the needs in the states and in the communities, and that they react to those needs. I think when you look at some of the strengths of RGGI from the beginning, I mean, the way it was set up, the idea of public benefit was a big part of the conversation before the first auction. What would happen to this money, and this idea that someone would go to a sort of fairly broad sort of sense of public benefit. Well, I think we have the benefit now of being able to be much more sort of specific about what we mean by that, and environmental justice and addressing the needs of communities that have been traditionally overburdened and underserved in these areas around environment is an area that we can really focus on as part of the public benefit. And then I think the whole idea of the investments in RGGI and the fact that the individual states can share an auction platform and share a way to get the revenue, but then can be very specific about what they do with the investments, such that they can really tailor those investments to specific needs. Because we know that the needs in New Jersey are going to be different than the needs in rural Vermont, but this is a flexible enough program we can meet those needs. And so I think program review is a really good opportunity to focus in the individual states and work out what those needs are and how best to meet them, and that we can really hit a number of goals as part of it.
I do think one of the things is, go ahead, Mandy.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, and it also, I should have mentioned, like, this also ties back into ambition, right? The more ambitious caps you have, the better outcomes you're going to get for all communities. So that's another reason that we think ambition needs to be like squarely on the table for the program review. But yeah, totally agree with what Justin did.
Yeah, and I was just going to mention one of the things that I thought was interesting, and it's a development that's happened last week. If you look at the Washington State Cap and Trade Bill, it very specifically looked at how do you ensure that localized emission reductions happen. So they kind of built a layer of equity into the program, rather than just saying, hey, it's an aggregate cap, do whatever you want so long as you're underneath that cap. they're also trying to address some of those, low income, disadvantaged frontline communities, which, if you think about all these programs kind of constantly growing from each other, like things that are happening in Reggie are showing up in California, things that are happening in California are showing up in Reggie. That level of growth or evolution, I think, is important here.
And I would say things that are happening in TCI are showing up in Reggie in the sense that, the discussions that Mandy was talking about, these are folks that are also part of teams on the Reggie state staff. So, when I started 5 years ago, environmental justice was something that was mentioned, but it wasn't mentioned a lot, and it wasn't the focus of perhaps the last program review. I think things are quite different now, and I think over the last 5 years, this is a subject that has been brought to the fore much more often amongst agency heads and staff engagement. So I do expect that this is going to be, and if you saw the announcement back in February, that was made clear that overburdened communities will be especially the ones that are going to be solicited for impact as we move forward with this.
I want to shift a little bit to Pennsylvania. So Andrew, obviously they've come out with a draft rule. Can you kind of give us an idea of, how involved have you guys been? How are the discussions going there? Does it, still appear to be on track for 2022?
Well, how involved have we been? I would just say that, historically, any state or jurisdiction that's interested in Reggie, the Reggie states are happy to, assist and guide in any way we can. And so we have been working with Pennsylvania DEP in helping guide them. As a matter of fact, way back a year ago on March 17th, I was supposed to go to Harrisburg and testify before a Senate committee, the Environmental Resources Committee, basically to tell them that, we at Reggie Inc. don't give orders to Pennsylvania, we take them, to make clear that, we're not some like big nasty New York City Reggie that will tell Pennsylvania what they have to be doing, but that we work, in coordination with all the states and in, at their behest, because every participating state is sovereign, that we, to move the program forward. Fortunately, didn't get a chance to do that because the pandemic hit, that Friday, March 13th was the last day I was in the office for almost a year. So how have we been helping them in any way that we can? We do have engagement with the Secretary of DEP, and things are moving forward. I don't know if you've been hearing about some of the unfortunate things that are going on where they're putting a hold on naming a new public utility commissioner because they're not happy with the way the governor has been handling this Reggie process. But the governor is, he's solid on this. They're moving forward with it. We do expect the anticipation looks like a 2022 participation. The hope is for a January 1, 2022 participation, but that's the basis on which we're moving forward.
So jumping off of that, I've got a question for both Mandy and Justin. You look at some of the criticism, I would say, of the Pennsylvania draft regulation is, potentially you have too lenient of a cap, or the cap is designed, it's aligned with Reggie, but, potentially you have more low-hanging fruit in the emission reductions that could happen from Pennsylvania, coal to gas switching, whatnot. So how does Reggie, as it's currently organized, potentially protect itself against some of those, bearish implications, or maybe emission reductions happening more quickly and allowing other leakage to occur maybe inside of the existing Reggie program? Either one of you can go. There's a second part to this question too.
Yeah, I can start briefly. So, as I mentioned at the beginning, we see a role for more ambition in the program, and we definitely see a role for more ambition in Pennsylvania. So we think, we want the cap to continue to decline. And, on the issue of what happens in the marketplace with this low-hanging fruit, we think there's tools. You have tools like the ECR and the CCR that are pretty well equipped to address issues that could arise from major changes in emissions in the region that impact the allowance market. And you've also got the program review as a very timely opportunity to just do that reviewing and forecasting to help Reggie navigate any issues that can arise. But I mean, as an environmental advocate, I certainly do hope that Pennsylvania makes reductions and makes them, as quickly as they possibly can.
Yeah, and I tend to agree. I probably have a slight skew towards, I think it ultimately the joining, the Pennsylvania joining RGGI is a political decision, and I don't know that there's a lot of harm in trying to work out a way to get them in, even if it means that there's they're not as stringent as you might want them ultimately to be. Obviously, there are limits to that, and that's something that the club, has to work out what they're prepared to live with. But I think particularly with the ECR and the CCR and the fact that there's still a bank out there, I think that gives you some opportunities to sort of work with their number. And these numbers are always ultimately a political decision. But I think there's a lot to be gained by getting them in the door and getting them set up. And if there is low hanging fruit, well, let's get to it. I would hate the idea of 3-4 years later saying, well, gee, they didn't get in because we couldn't work out what to do with the low hanging fruit, and it's still there. It's still hanging out there. So I think that it's something that is going to have to get worked out. But that's no different than every state that joined RGGI, whether they joined at the beginning or later on. And I think the negotiation around what the cap looks like is always a bit of a challenge. But I think it's one of the things that you get from the maturity of the program. It just gives you some wiggle room to work that out.
So the second part of this question is, and we've kind of already gone through this a little bit, or we're going through it right now. As Andrew mentioned, Pennsylvania Republicans are kicking, screaming, doing pretty much anything they possibly can to halt, stop, blow up this pathway to RGGI. So for the existing program, is there anything that they potentially could or should do to kind of insulate themselves if Pennsylvania were to join the program and then a court ruling potentially takes them out?
So I guess my thought on that is that anybody who enters one of these marriages without a divorce agreement after seeing what happened in Ontario is really playing with fire. I mean, I think it's as I said, there is the underlying program, and then there's political decisions, and so I think that they have to have some mechanism. We worked it out when New Jersey pulled out of the program. That was the first time it happened, and it can be done. They would be foolish not to have some mechanism for any state to leave, because you never know when it's going to happen. But I think that it's not that big of a deal. I think you can insulate yourself. They just have to have a mechanism for what happens with those allowances if a state was to pull out.
Mandy, did you have any comments?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Justin said. I think we've seen instances where there's been interruptions in programs and RGGI and beyond, and RGGI seems pretty resilient to that and has been able to kind of nimbly navigate that as have other carbon markets. And on the issue of Pennsylvania and kind of the atmospherics around the rule, I'd be remiss if I didn't say that someone's working kind of every day to try to secure RGGI in Pennsylvania. We see that the way that DEP is approaching this is firmly anchored in their existing authority. They have the authority to regulate greenhouse gases. They're doing it. There's also, despite a lot of the noise, really significant public and industry support for Pennsylvania getting into RGGI as soon as they possibly can. And if you think about them getting in January of 2022, you're going to have a quarterly auction proceeds coming in a couple months later that'll kind of really show the value of the program and allow them to make those investments on the ground in real time. And it's happening at a moment when there's already immense transition in Pennsylvania's power sector without a clear plan for what do you do with that. And that, RGGI offers a lot of opportunities for thinking about strategic investments there.
Yeah. I would just add, I think in the bigger picture, the idea that we're not moving the power industry in a direction that it sort of leads towards Reggie is just foolish. I mean, I think there's you can have an argument about when the timing and the cap and all of those sorts of things, but I think that the country as a whole and the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic specifically moving towards cleaner electricity, and I think that Reggie can play a role in that. And I don't think ultimately there's any harm in any state being a part of that. I mean, obviously there's other sort of political considerations going on there, but I think it's short-sighted to not work out how you can do it as opposed to how you can undo it.
Yeah, I think when you have Pennsylvania coal miners supporting Joe Biden's infrastructure plan, that's sending important signals too about what's going on in Pennsylvania now.
And I'm just going to jump off a little bit on what Justin just said earlier about, that there's a political element to Pennsylvania getting into the scheme. I probably wouldn't call it political. I think I might call it, I'm probably looking at this through Andrew or, Reggie Inc. eyes. Getting a state, coal heavy state, into a carbon program is great PR for, a carbon market, whether it be, California getting somebody from the Southwest, or Reggie getting somebody from a, coal heavy area. It really shows that, cap and trade program can coexist with, carbon intensive sources and also drive those emission reductions down. I didn't ask anybody this question, but I feel like it's worth throwing out there. The fact that Pennsylvania is kind of on board to get in on 2022 and you've got a program review going on at the same time, does that add a little bit of help to the stringency discussion as, they maybe have a soft entry, but you can kind of look at it more broadly speaking during the 2021, 2022 review and make any tweaks kind of in those following years. I don't know if Justin or Mandy want to say anything about that.
I would say yes. I mean, I think that one advantage of Pennsylvania joining would be that they get to have a seat at the table, but they can also be part of that, so a more complete part of that conversation. I think that it's likely, that if Pennsylvania is on track to join, that the program review is going to somehow take into account the fact that they're joining. I mean, it's not like a Vermont joining. I mean, that's a huge increase in the program, and it's have a real impact. But whether it's through, some tweak to the ECR or CCR mechanisms or however it's done, I think that it would be hard in the program review to ignore the fact that Pennsylvania was about to join, or likely would have joined by the time the review is done and the changes, whatever they are, would go into effect. So I think that, you could expect that, as in the context of program review and that open conversation amongst the states, that there'd be a lot of conversation about that. And that, I think, would be good timing to have that conversation.
If anybody else wants to jump in, shout.
I would just say that if you look at the timing of program review, you could interpret part of that as an intent to allow Pennsylvania to be a full participant in that to the extent it can be. So if we had wanted to do program review in 2021 and started in January and finish in December, that could have been possible. But with sort of the looming participation of Pennsylvania, I think the thinking was it was better to allow that to play out and then, allow them to have more of a role in that process, both for the efficacy of the program and for, I think, politically, it also be much more palatable.
I know that this is a very direct question to you, Andrew, but like, do the discussions about, the potential lawsuits in Pennsylvania, there's a lawsuit right now pending on Virginia. Are those front of mind for commissioners? Is that like a level of concern, or is it just like there's noise in the background, we're aware of it, but like we're not freaking out?
I would say that if a state is able to participate and all the numbers look right, they're welcomed with open arms, without any consideration of whether there's pending lawsuits or what could happen. I think that's true of Pennsylvania, true of New Jersey, Virginia. I mean, Virginia looked like a real problem child there, but we were going to welcome them with the consignment auction process, and then we welcomed them once that other hiccup got resolved when they got a new legislature. So I would say that's more background.
I would just add that I think that, again, because the program has been around for more than a decade, this is not the first time that the state has faced lawsuits. Mm-hmm. I think early on there was a lot more front of mind concern about some of the lawsuits in New York, and because it was a brand new program, nothing had been tested. We weren't sure where it was going. We weren't sure if it was going to be subsumed by a federal program. And a lot of those questions have been answered, whether you like the answers or not. They've been answered, and so I think there's just a more mature sort of level of understanding of how these things work, and a recognition that the program is pretty resilient, and if there's a challenge or a hiccup here or there, that the states are in a position to work through that and keep going.
So I got a few more questions. I'm just going to remind people who are listening to drop some questions into the Q&A box. I'll try to get to them. But I did want to kind of, we've discussed this kind of on the edges, but we haven't really talked about it. If you go back and you look at the first program review and you look at the 2016-2017 review, Reggie's constantly having to deal with this allowance supply. It just kind of lingers thereabout. So I don't know if Justin or Mandy want to talk about, is there a way that, you can fix the issue once and for all rather than constantly coming back to the same issue and saying, okay, well, the surplus is now 95 million. Let's do a bank adjustment for the next 5 years. And then we're going to deal with this again in 2021. And it's just like this forever child. Anyone?
Andy, do you want to jump in? I mean, I'm happy to say something.
I defer to Justin on the mechanics of that. I mean, because we're looking at this at the lens of just driving down the cap as
right.
One of your core solutions here.
So, I think that it's actually not really a unusual thing in terms of cap and trade programs around the world. Pretty much all of them have ended up long and mostly stayed somewhat long. I mean, you want it a little bit long because you want other players to be able to get into the market. It helps with liquidity and it helps with the market mechanism piece. I think that the states have been really good at straight up cutting the cap. When you think about getting all of those jurisdictions together to agree on reducing the number of allowances available that they have to sell, I think they've done a pretty good job of that. In addition, I think that the ECR mechanism, although it's relatively new, is a way to make that happen without having to come back together and actually make a decision on it. It's a more of an automatic thing. I could see a situation where that was maybe tweaked a little to help to take care of this. And then the bank itself, I think, leaves an opportunity, as I sort of touched on earlier, if you're going to bring in another state and, it just gives you some room to work with another state. I think that, but I guess the short answer to your question is I don't know that this goes away anytime soon. I think it's always going to be a question about whether the cap is set right in relation to the allowances and then balancing both sides. I think there'll always be people who want a more stringent cap, and there'll be always people who want to just slow it there. Let's be careful now. And I think that is the conversation you ultimately end up having as part of this program. So So I don't know that it goes away ever. I just think you get better at having it.
I'm assuming that you don't want to comment, Andrew, but if you do, shout.
Oh, I'd love to, but then I'd have to shoot you, as they say. But now I'd say what Justin has just said resonates in different sort of parties in the conversation. Some being very, very sort of rigorous about wanting to get rid of that bank and almost never see it come back, and then others that are very clear of the importance of having some of that bank there for the purposes of a liquid market and an active market. Because if you had no bank, I mean, you're really getting to the point where where's price going to go at the very end for that last allowance if there's only like one allowance available left. So I think we definitely have the input from both of those sides in the conversation. And I would say the states have been very, very rigorous in general about doing something about the bank. And our market monitor has been more about seeing the role of the bank in some ways being positive for the market as a whole.
Kind of talking about something that you might be able to discuss. So you're going into this program review this summer. You're roughly, this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but you're going to have two-ish auctions where you've seen the ECR be part of the market. How can you and the states and whatnot, like, how is that mechanism, those post-2020 changes, going to be evaluated? Like, how are you going to make sure that things that were agreed to in 2016, 2017 were correct, are working as well as they should be, and don't need additional kind of enhancements, stringencies, whatnot?
Well, I think by the time we get into those discussions, which I anticipate will be more in the 2022 timeframe, we may have 2 or 3 more auctions under our belt to see how things have worked. Right now, it doesn't look like the ECR's been close to triggered yet. If that continues to hold, then I think there may be some questions about the levels of the ECR and the CCR and setting those again. A lot of that work was done with the help of modeling and determining, sort of the pathway for both the ECR and the CCR as a delta above and below what the anticipated allowance prices would be through the help of modeling. So I would say that, probably modeling, even though Justin was intimating earlier that he thought, it's really just going to be about the discussion amongst the states of what we really want to do. I do think there'll be a technical analysis that would help us guide us as to where we want the ECR and CCR to be going.
I don't know if Justin or Mandy want to say anything there. I do have some broader speaking comments.
I guess the one other thing that I think plays into this, which I think is in some ways a bit more of a challenge to understand, is the role of some of the complementary policies, and even of we had the federal government come out with a new Paris commitment, and how does that flow through the economy, and what impact does some of those things have on RGGI? I think that can get a little bit complex at times, because individual states are sort of heading off doing their own pieces of that. And then with this federal overlay on that, I think that also will become a part of the program reviewing, sort of understanding what impact do some of those things have on the market, because it's not just about the RGGI market and what the RGGI cap is. There's a bunch of other policies that are interacting with it underneath, and I think that can sometimes be kind of difficult to work in, and that'll keep the modelers on their toes, I suspect.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to pivot a little bit and just kind of go a little bit further out, and I'm going to throw this back towards Mandy. So thankfully we've got into a presidential year during this program review. So you've got Joe Biden putting some climate policies in place, whatnot. Just want to talk a little bit about how that broader federal policy might kind of trickle down into this state level, program review, what states want to do. How do you kind of work in all those secondary programs to kind of all move in the same general direction.
Yeah, sure. And, it's not the first time we've had this conversation. Folks may recall the Clean Power Plan from years ago and conversations around RGGI and other programs and how they nest into that. So we're kind of back at that point again. In our view, like state action continuing is absolutely critical. So we fully support continuing pushing on all levers of government to achieve that President Biden goal of 50 to 52%. We frankly are going to need action at every single lever of government. And the power sector is still a huge source of emissions, is over a quarter of the pollution still. So, in our view, RGGI's got a useful, proven platform and framework to help continue emissions reductions and to help us on the path for national goals. We see already a lot of other states are discussing RGGI as a potential model on carbon pricing. So, for example, you've got Governor Cooper in North Carolina who has an executive order targeting a 70% emissions reduction for the power sector by 2030. That state agency has undertaken a lot of analysis with input from us and about 40 other stakeholders, and really points to RGGI as one of the key pathways for achieving that ambitious goal. There's also a petition pending before the North Carolina Environmental Management Commission, urging it to take action on climate pollution, and we think the EMC should act swiftly on that petition. Looking to the Midwest, you've got Governor Pritzker in Illinois, who also has aggressive goals for transitioning the power sector and has pointed to, directly to a price on carbon as one of the solutions. And Illinois really well positioned to become a Midwest leader on carbon pricing. The shift in the national landscape is one reason why we do see immense value in using the next program review to address some of the core issues like ambition to ensure we're aligned with those national level goals and maintaining RGGI's role as a leader. It underscores the value of using the RGGI program to develop some of those frameworks to address, really complex issues like emissions leakage. We think all of that could still be of huge interest, even as national policies, we hope, will soon be coming into play also.
Justin, I'm assuming that you'll have some comments on that.
Well, I cannot imagine any RGGI state that would want to give up its sort of role in pushing these policies and RGGI in particular forward at this point. Having been through one round of possible federal preemption or overtaking, RGGI was set up as a pilot almost. It wasn't quite a pilot, but that sort of thing to show the feds the way, and they never took it. And despite the fact we got close and there's been talk at various times, I cannot imagine any RGGI state that would want to give up that effort in hopes that something would come from the feds in the future. I think that the maturity of the program and the fact that they've been able to work out how to make it work over all these years, and the fact that it hasn't had some of the big problems that the EU ETS had early on. We learned a lot from the EU. We learned from California a bit more in real time. Other states are now learning from RGGI. I think that the idea of the states leading on these issues has been firmly cemented. And frankly, I think this environmental justice sort of increased sort of review and understanding and look at that means that you really have to do state by state efforts to meet the particular needs of communities in those states, and that's best done by the states who are closest to those communities. There is no doubt there's a ton of work to be done. We don't just solve this problem overnight. I think there's a lot of sort of realization that has happened and a lot of understanding that's been gained in the last few years. But that, just reminds us that for a long time, we weren't really understanding that as well as we should. And we don't want to stop now. We need to really get our hands around that. And I think that's best done at the state level and will actually propel as much of the state effort as anything going forward.
So the last question, which is always the reoccurring question with RGGI. So in 2016, 2017, especially with, as Mandy mentioned, the Clean Power Plan, you definitely heard a lot of chatter, I would say, about RGGI linkages or RGGI-esque programs. Specifically, I remember one in the MISO grid area. So with Joe Biden pushing climate on the federal level, Andrew, have you seen? I mean, have you seen an uptick in more conversations with states either interested in implementing a RGGI-like program and wanting to know more, or linking with RGGI just in general?
Yeah, I think the Biden administration, as far as I can tell, has sent a signal that a lot of their focus is going to be how to transform the federal government and its usage of energy as a template and example for the nation as a whole, rather than trying to re-up, a Clean Power Plan 2. And to me, that means that, back to Justin's point, I don't think something like RGGI is going to be usurped anytime soon by the federal government. So we are seeing interest on the part, as I said, in the last 3 years, we've seen 2.5 new states come in, as we count Pennsylvania as half a state, and we're also hearing about, Mandy referenced developments in North Carolina. That's something that could end up being put on the RGGI plate as well. There's actually a study done by a group of students at Columbia University as part of their sort of capstone, which was looking at the potential for other states and what makes a state sort of an interesting candidate for participation in RGGI. It's a very interesting work that they've put together, and a lot of it is about basically the political will, but it also is about what their energy profile is, what their economic profile is, what the state of health is in the states. So I do think we're going to see much continued. It's funny, we're called the initiative, and it was called an initiative for a reason, because it was like, this is just a start here, folks. I don't know, when you're 12 or 15 years old, if you can still be calling yourself an initiative or not. I don't know what the right other term is. We don't like to say program, because you're not joining a program here. But I would say that it does look like there is going to be more interest on the part of other states and jurisdictions in this type of work that we're doing here at RGGI.
So just to be blunt, is there another state on the sidelines? Is there another person behind Pennsylvania? Can we look forward to somebody else? You get to Pennsylvania, you move to North Carolina, like who?
Well, our website used to say the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic states. Now we just say the Eastern states.
Yeah.
Because with Virginia in there. I would say that states that are interested in participation will come to us and ask about it. As I said, North Carolina, you have a governor that seems very interested in significant reductions in greenhouse gases from the utility sector. In some ways, more ambitious maybe than even what RGGI's put forth. So maybe there'll be conversations there.
Cool. Well, I think I'm going to wrap it up here. I don't have any more questions. No questions in the Q&A. So we can all get to our days of being vaccinated, being safe, going back to somewhat normal. I just want to thank everybody for joining us, and everybody that's been part of this panel. Justin, Andrew, Mandy, you've been great. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks for your time. Thanks, Dan.